This was a conversation that stayed with me. I sat down with Dr. Thomas Gartenmann, author, executive trauma-informed somatic and systemic coach, and founder of Aergon. His work lives at the intersection of Western psychology and Eastern wisdom. We talk about the constant threat cues we're dealing with today, and how this can result in our overloaded nervous systems operating beyond their capacity. When we get flooded, we default to old scripts. Scripts shrink presence. They narrow our choices and pull us away from the felt experience of being fully alive. What Thomas makes clear is that regulation and presence aren't abstract ideals. They're capacities that already exist within us. When we strengthen them, we become better leaders, better partners, and just better human beings. Here's where we begin. The harm we're facing today isn't caused by bad people or bad intentions. It's caused by nervous systems operating beyond their capacity.
I agree to that. Yeah. If our nervous system is in, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, we're just reacting to the situation based on a very old script. We're not in the moment, we're in the past. And we can't create the future out of the past. So there is an argument that can be made to be present and having choice.
You've written about our current polycrisis, geopolitical conflict, economic uncertainty, rapid technological acceleration, climate anxiety. When human nervous systems are exposed to sustained, layered threat like this, what tends to happen inside of us?
Well, my sense is it's an acceleration. All those triggers are in us anyway. But if I compare my upbringing, where there were no cell phones, everything was condensed. If I read the newspaper at all, in an article, there was news were at 7:00 and we kind of sat in front of the news. There were less triggered. There was less connection to the world. We were in our bubble and we heard about things from a perspective of the past. Now we are almost live in the situation. We have the visual impact of this. We see all that. Maybe in the 70s you had pictures of Vietnam and these places. Those were pictures. Now you have films from Gaza, from the Ukraine. So I think our nervous systems are really stressed out to deal with all of that.
It feels almost like the technology has far accelerated beyond our capacity to keep up, that we were never really, we're not designed to take in the really disturbing and triggering nature of it all.
Absolutely. This design is 150,000 years old, and it was a good design. And it was designed for a world where there were many threats. And the reason we're here is because the design was so good. Unfortunately, our system is very sensitive. Somebody overtakes you with his car or her car, you're reading something and suddenly the whole thing kicks in. And we're in a state of survival compared to looking at it and deciding whether it's a threat or not.
We know from movies what violent conflict looks like, but when someone is feeling threatened, often without realizing it, in less dramatic environments like home or work, what do we tend to see behaviorally?
Well, on a smaller scale, we see all of the potential behaviors. So we are either fighting it, we're fleeing it, we're overwhelmed with the information and the emotions our body produces, or we're trying to fawning our way into being kind that nobody will attack us because we're smiling and helpful. I think really basic strategies most of us use. And the invitation is to really assess the situation and maybe stay curious and connected and wonder what's going on with the other person, which brings us to leadership, because a leader that is triggered will trigger other people. And we are in a less productive state, in a less helpful connection, if we are in a connection.
I've seen, you might have seen as well, leadership teams where you can see almost familial dynamics at play. A leader who maybe is the overbearing, controlling mother, and then you can see the dynamics within that leadership change almost become like a family acting themselves out. And I have to admit, I played sort of the fawning, perfectionist pleasing role. And to what you just said, it took me some time to recognize that that's what was happening at work. It's easy at work because that can be written off as being a high achiever, high performer, whatever. But what's really going on under the surface is something different, that it's playing out in that way. And once there's that consciousness to it, the relationships really shift.
Yeah. So, I think this is really a powerful picture. So you're in a setting and it looks like family. And it's as if you have your old script in your family and you're reading it. It somehow matches situation, but it's not helpful. It's not resolving the situation. And there's the invitation to become aware of it. And when we're aware, we have choice. And we can over time learn to deal with our nervous system in a better way, or our nervous system adapts to it in a better way. And some of the strategies, what you said, are actually in the business context very helpful. I mean, people who will not say no and work their head off, insecure overachievers, we termed those people applying in consultancies. That is a trait a number of people find very helpful because they're very productive. But it's not a long-term strategy. It's exhausting for some.
What you're describing, being aware of what's happening inside, it's taken me some time to recognize the difference between being panicked and recognizing that my nervous system is activated. It's not something that was modeled to me or that I was taught as a child. Can you explain interoception and why it's so critical and foundational in navigating the world?
I think I had an environment where, of course, I had two models. My father being probably anxious and in many cases choleric, which is not a situation where I felt safe. And so I modeled that, plus my mother, who was more on the absolutely friendly, supportive, everything goes. So I had two models to choose from. And then specific situations like driving in a car. My father was screaming and was very loud and getting easily upset. The funny thing happened when I met my wife, and after some time, she said, "Thomas, you're such a balanced person. You're very friendly. But what happens to you when you drive your car?" And I said, "What? That's how one drives a car." He said, "No, you're shouting, you're aggressive." It took me some time to understand the difference, to look at myself in that situation and kind of reflect on it. And of course, I was occasionally I'm still a very aggressive driver. And then just realizing that I was sitting for 18 years in that car, and in Europe you start with 18 driving a car, and I just copied whatever I saw. And I guess that is relevant for leadership because we very often just copy. We see what others do and we think, okay, that's a standard. Which also makes a point that leadership always starts with the leader. And if you want to change the culture, the leader goes first. He has to model the new behavior. He or she has to demonstrate that in ways. And so just to your question, so I realized it, but that didn't change it yet. It was still, when I was triggered, it was like in my face. And over time, I got more distance. I realized it was upsetting me, but I didn't have to just react immediately. I could kind of breathe or do other things. Initially in my training, it was much more come up with a better question or a better frame. So one of my frames was, my Zen master is driving in front of me and teaching me a lesson. And so, I framed it in a helpful way. The more I got into the different approaches, I realized the emotions play a very important role, and having the space for those emotions, that they wouldn't overwhelm me. I was part of the practice. We talked about meditation. We talked about ways to just feel it internally. So instead of having my emotions here and being my emotions, I got more space and I said, I'm not angry, I'm feeling angry. And making that distinction helped me to kind of have the space to choose.
That is fantastic. The way you're describing it was as though your wife was seeing you as two different people, like you were a totally different person when you were driving.
But we are. We are. There is a German book which is really has a funny title. It's, if I translate that, it's Who Are You and How Many?
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, but the idea is context and, expectation and training, of course, will activate certain parts in us. In the family, we behave different. And this is really funny when you go back to your, the old family or with your siblings, suddenly behavior comes up where I go, okay, I haven't seen that one in a long time. And friends, context plays an important role. We're biological, we're psychological, but we're also sociological kind of beings, and that plays a role.
I love that you've brought up the different parts of us because I think people are talking about this more generally. I think it was Dr. Philip Bromberg who wrote quite a bit about everyone has different self states, as you were describing how you are at work or how you are with your family. I have a friend of mine that when he goes back to England, his accent changes just very naturally, something as obvious as that. But we all have that inside of us. And this is, I'm not making this up, but my next question was literally an example of me having road rage. So it's so synchronicitous that we both have this experience, because I was talking about when I drive on the highway here in New York, there's one in particular that's very, very, people drive very, very aggressively. And if someone cuts me off, instinctually, of course, my adrenaline is going to go up and I'm going to hit the brakes. But then after that, there's this space and this moment of choice in how I react. And I very much want to be seen. And intellectually, I know that I want to be the very righteous person who just goes, oh, they're having a bad day. They didn't see me. It's fine. But me personally, I have always struggled with that and have responded poorly in these types of situations, honking or perhaps a gesture or something like that. I'm so pleased that you had a very similar experience in your life.
And here, just, in terms of the context, I drove a car many times in the US because I was working in Boston and New York. Find the American traffic very calm and very smooth. I studied a year in France, and that I found, or if you drive in Italy, that's a different way of driving. So it's also culture. Yeah, and what we perceive as being already threatened might be a very normal kind of, hey, when I park, I need to bump into the car in order to get my space. That was a saying when we parked in Paris, right? Because everything is so tight. So there is also a cultural context, what is normal and what is considered to be rude or aggressive.
That's so true. I've noticed that even in the UK, people will pull out just because the traffic is very congested and you have to take that moment. And cars are smaller and people, certainly in the cities, are driving slower. But here, you're right. I think people tend to personalize it as the how dare you. There's sort of a how dare you maybe projection going on. But it reminds me of that indigenous parable of the two wolves that we have inside of ourselves, the anger and fear. One is anger and fear, and the other one is care and wisdom. And the first step isn't choosing the quote unquote right wolf; it's recognizing that they're both there. And
which one are you feeding?
Yeah, the one that you're. I'm wondering how we build, and I love your example of imagining that your Zen master is in front of you. We each have to find the way to build that capacity to align our intentions, because I don't think most people want to behave in some of these ways, and they're often surprised that they can align their intentions with their behaviors.
Well, I think if you if we slow down, if I describe my process, I got triggered and I was totally in that aggressive state. There was no space for me to make a choice. If we discuss the frame, I choose or I ask myself the question, I think it's my Zen master teaching me a lesson, then already there is a space to cognitively kind of influence it. And then we can look at the various approaches. And now we know that breath is actually the big thing. So if I just breathe out longer, I can relax my whole system. If I activate more of my peripheral vision, I can kind of influence my state. I do the breath, it just relaxes my system. And knowing that and practicing that helps to get more space.
Absolutely. I taught that to a young cousin of mine who was having some anxiety, and we sat and I taught her that she could do this at school or if she was traveling and she was anxious. It's brilliant that we have these different methods that are accessible to everyone. That I also think it helps to lessen the shame and the self-consciousness of having some of these feelings to start with. That you see someone like Dr. Andrew Huberman teaching the breathing on, it sort of normalizes it. This is not for someone who has an emotional problem. We all have these feelings and they come up. And
I don't think you have to teach it. I mean, I had the luxury and really the gift of growing with 3 kids, right? Helping them. And I remember when they were upset, it was already part of their system. And then probably some of the teaching, some of the environment got that out of them. So I think if we let them do that more and provide the space for them to relax, and it's totally okay to kind of regulate your system, and you're modeling it, showing that. A friend of mine, she learned about that, and her 2 kids, which are more in the range of 6 to 8, when they do a lot of stuff, then she goes and regulates herself, and then the kids say, "Oh, mommy's breathing again."
It's great.
They notice, and you're showing how you can deal with this, and then daddy and mommy are not perfect, but they're kind of showing that they're dealing with these situations in a specific way.
That's a wonderful example, and to know that parents are modeling that. I'm wondering, as a parent and also as someone who works with executives, when we are around other people, sometimes we're the ones being activated, and sometimes we see other people being activated, and often without their awareness. How do you counsel people to deal with that? How do we react skillfully to others when we come across them being dysregulated? How can we react honestly and effectively without being judgmental or controlling?
Well, I think it starts with your own state and being aware of your own state and connected to your own state. So if I'm calm and I notice somebody else is agitated, angry, I can say, I can point out, I have the feeling this was upsetting. So you support them in realizing their state while being calm. And wording it in a way that this is my perception. I'm not sure. You are angry is not
Right.
less helpful. So it seems to me that was upsetting you. You feels to me as if, and then there is something I can address on the cognitive level. I'm describing things, or I can feel with the person. I can kind of tune in. And that is a much stronger bond. And I can hold that, and I feel that in my body that somebody is upset. I'm describing that this is still not the biggest skill set I have, because my system is still very sensitive, and I also pull back and I go, oh wow, that's happening to me, realizing that. And then I find language is also very precise and gives away pointers. I make a difference between reacting and responding. So I react, that's more the animal trained part, and I respond. I choose in the very Viktor Frankl's sense, I choose my response. There is a space I can choose to assess the situation, what is needed, and first go and look at the relational level. I mean, on the content where we can very fast and be very quick in exchanging our views, but what's the connection level? How connected do I feel? How safe do I feel? What's my sense of the room if there is a group of people? And it's amazing if you my sense is, look, the energy is really low and everybody goes like, oh yeah, or no, not for me. But that kind of shifts the attention and people then tune into this. And I think we spend too much time in our left side of the hemisphere, the logical, the language, the linear. And as a facilitator or as a leader, you can activate the other side in asking questions or sharing observations. And being playful. I find playful is a really, if you look at the archetypes, a jester who kind of changes the situation. And I think we're very creative and much better connected if there is a humorous part. I mean, not humorous in terms of ignoring what is. Having a view on it, okay, we're stuck in this. It's 2:00 in the morning. Let's creatively think about how we can solve that and structure it. And if there is a bit more of lightness and playfulness, I found that in many situations when I worked as a consultant, that really helped. Or we can pull ourselves down, oh no, it's really bad, and why are we here, and da da da, and then. So that's also a choice you have as a leader. It's an important distinction not to get away from what is, but naming it and framing it in a way that we still have choice, we still have agency in this, and how would we do it in a way that is helpful to everybody? So
the playfulness is such a great point, and I want to speak up to you a little bit later about joy, but it does feel in sort of this tangible heaviness that's sort of around us. And maybe it goes back to what you were saying. Much of the information and news that we get is intentionally skewed negative because that tends to have higher clicks. Yeah. So I feel like we really have this vacuum of joy and playfulness as you're describing. It feels like there's a real lack around us. So I really love you bringing that in, that we can control that, make that choice to bring some of that. I certainly need to be better at that myself.
I'm not sure you can control it. I'm not sure. Is it called Frankl's paradox? The very moment you choose to chase joy or happiness, it kind of evades you. I think it's a side product of sensing where your nervous system is, what you need, sensing the others, being in a state, and suddenly you get these flow states, and you can create that. And so there are many things you can do. I'm one important point for me in all the courses I do or the leadership trainings. You practice certain things, and it's much more important to actually do things and see how you're acting in this. Only in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. Instead of saying, look, this is the way you have to do it, it's just understanding, there will be situations which are tough. Let's figure out how we deal with tough situations. Do I have to regulate myself? Do I have to go a step back and see where we are? Take a break? Because the capacity is in the room. The knowledge is in the room. And it's a bit like, am I just sitting on my hard drive and trying to find, based on my history, the right solution? Or are we all connected with each other and even the internet? We can ChatGPT our way out of this. is a different way of working. And that's a state and a way of connecting, I find.
Do you see what I did? I was over-intellectualizing joy. I'm trying to find the framework for joy. This is sort of the failure in...
Is there a framework for joy? I don't know.
No, it's absurd.
I will notice when I feel joy, I know, and you will know too. It's something we just love to have. And it's also one of those emotions. one of the things I learned in the theater work, an emotion usually takes 90 seconds. It goes, it has a peak, and then unless it's grief or shame, slightly different time frame. But that was such an insight. It's not, oh, I'm sad and I'm angry and I'm da. No, there is a peak and an onset there. And if I let it be, if I observe it, if I kind of cling to it, I'm now angry and I need to, then of course I'm creating a consistent feeling and it gets a mood.
I wanted to share with you, one of my guilty pleasures is medical dramas. I can't believe I'm admitting this, but we all need something light. This is I get too heavy and philosophical, and then I need something else. So this is how I try to find some artificial joy. I watch these medical dramas here in the US. And there was one aptly called ER about 30 years ago I used to watch. And there's a new version out today.
Clooney was playing in that, or is that the
Exactly. That's exactly it. Clooney and Noah Wiley, and now he's back in this new show called Pitt, which takes place in Pittsburgh in a U.S. city hospital. And so it's very easy to draw parallels. It's the same actor and a city emergency room. But what really surprised me was that apparently now it's a normal occurrence for patients and families to become aggressive, even violent, with hospital staff. So much so that there's new protocols. It happens so frequently. So I can go back watching this old show, and obviously you notice things like they didn't have cell phones and how the world has changed. The other thing that really surprised me was this new behavioral component about the rage that a lot of frontline hospital workers receive. They have special codes that they call and security. And I noticed here in New York City as well, on the buses and trains, they have posted signs warning about the consequences of attacking workers. I don't know if this is another cultural U.S. dynamic versus Europe.
It is.
Okay.
This is the first time I hear that.
Okay.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, a train's running late, people will punch the the conductor, but this is happening so frequently that you're starting to see that it's changing our systems. And I'm wondering if this increase is less about more quote unquote bad behavior than it is an epidemic of dysregulation that's showing up as aggression. Up to now, we've been talking about individuals and relational systems, but when you scale what we're talking about to organizations where you have workforces of hundreds of thousands of people, the complexity is going to increase dramatically. I'm wondering what you're seeing, and obviously you're in Europe, so it's maybe different than here in the US, but I'm wondering how that might be playing out in companies today and how you're advising leaders on how to deal with these sort of shifts in our society.
Yeah. So I'm not, I don't have the answer, but there are a couple of things that come to mind. First of all, we had the Corona time, which was a stressful situation, and left many people almost in a helpless state. I mean, there was a trust in governments running things and all that, and suddenly you're at home in difficult situations. The second thing, the more you observe it, the more it becomes norm. It's like my father driving the car, and suddenly you see people screaming, and you go, I can scream too. So if that wasn't culturally done, you're not doing it. There is this unconscious kind of copying. And the most important bit, I find people more and more stressed out, and if I look at the figures in terms of burnout, in terms of needing support, a psychiatrist being busy for 6, 8 months before you get to them, it is an indication that the whole system is stressed out. And then you mentioned the polycrisis. I mean, at least the parents then see so many things, and the focus is, because our brain is primarily, the main function of our brain is to ensure survival. The second one is to be right. That's the reason we have these interesting discussions. It's a system that is stressed, and we see the symptoms of that in different ways. And then you have different cultures, and that is one of the things which is so eye-opening. I mean, if you spend some time abroad, if you lived in another country, you go, what? Why are they doing this? And the first time you realize, you take that for granted. Oh, this is how things are done. And if you have a curious mind, you go, I'm just curious, where did they come from? Why are they doing it differently? I mean, in Switzerland, as we're famously known for our trains are on time. I think there is an app you can complain if the train is 2 minutes or 3 minutes late. So, different context, different focus. So I think one of the really eye-opening things for me working as a consultant, I worked a lot in Asia, I worked in the US, I worked in Europe, is increasing the resolution and seeing that things are done differently. And it's not one standard as I was taught, right? This is the way to behave. And look at how people use cutlery. It's fascinating. Oh, yeah. I just look at it and I say, probably from America, UK, France, I'm not sure. There's similarities, but even if you take Switzerland and Germany, where some people don't know that Switzerland has 4 languages and also cultural differences. So there are things you wouldn't do in Switzerland, you can do in Germany and vice versa. And then people say, the Swiss or these Germans, I mean, look at how they behave. And I find that tickles my curiosity. I go, why did that start? Because one king decided this is the norm, or somebody came up and really had a good reason for it. So
this is the beauty of travel and why it's so important to travel and get to know other people and other cultures, to find the opportunities as well, and to know yourself better. I thought I was a pretty well-cultured person. I worked for a global consulting firm, but then they moved me to Europe. I lived there for a couple of years. And even though I had traveled there, it was a completely different thing to actually live. And even within Europe, of course, again, as an American, I'm thinking I'm in Europe. Well, it's not your... there's all these countries and microcultures within Europe. So it was a very humbling and educating experience to move to a different country and to be and to have all of my beliefs and experiences challenged.
Exactly.
Speaking of, I have a train experience in Switzerland that was very eye-opening. I was there for business and I landed at the airport and I thought, oh, my hotel is so close, I'll just take the metro. I don't want to be a tourist and jump in a taxi. I'm going to do this. It's so it was like one stop away. And I went to the right train track where it was supposed to be, and the train was there. So it was say 5:28, and my train was supposed to leave at 5:30. So I got on the 5:28 train, and it takes off. And next thing I know, people are opening up, picnic baskets and sandwiches and taking their coats off and relaxing, and the train's going really, really fast. And I was walking around going, what train? Finally, I found out that I was on the express train to Bern, which for Americans would be like going express to Philadelphia. And, the conductor comes over, no stopping. And then I had like a minute to get off, to get on the other side of the train to go back. So all in all, my very quick one stop to my hotel in Zurich ended up being about 3 hours, because I didn't realize that it could be possible that there could be a 5:28 train and a 5:30 train, that's how precise the train systems are. So I had to share that.
Yeah, that's, and having the resolution and questioning the upbringing and the way we look at the world is one of the things and the gifts you get in being in different cultures. I was at a global training and I think a Chinese person pointed out some behaviors of the German group, and I went, I didn't see that. Because for me, it was normalized. But for her, it was like, this is what I noticed. And so this is one thing. And then language is the house of being. The language we speak is also creating our reality. If you then change the language and you realize you perceive things also different and you feel different in this. And so the priorities change. It's not just the context, it's also the language. And so I find that amazing and very interesting. I'm not very gifted in languages. I speak 2, I can claim, and one dialect, because Swiss German is more of a dialect than in a separate language. So speaking this dialect compared to speaking High German, huge difference in how it feels, how it comes across, how words are used. And there is fun in this discovery.
I on another business trip to Switzerland, I was with a group that included a German speaker. And I thought we were going to Davos that year. And of course, it was very, 3 trains and then there was a bus and it was very logistically challenged. And I thought, we'll be okay because we have Bernard here and he's going to translate. And then he went, oh, I don't understand what anyone's saying. And even that alone is going back to awareness, that there's so much, even if you are well traveled, that you can learn. I've certainly been teased as an American, and sometimes it's well justified around the world. But I think it can help you take yourself a little less seriously too. And we can kind of point out these things playfully to one another.
And you look at the label American. I mean, that's really a generalization. If you're from California, if you're Midwest, if you've different way of speaking, different way of valuing things in music, in choices and all that. So, and the same is true for Europe. And so we can increase the resolution. And I like the title of your podcast, because for me, it kind of reminded me when I was a kid, I always thought, the world is a map and it's empty and I need to fill it with different colors. And then I color code it, and then you have the streets, or you have the buildings, or you have whatever you choose, and that's how I will learn about the world. And then I think I discovered the fractals in the 80s, and that was so amazing that the length of a coast depends on how closely you look at it, and you have the units in higher resolutions showing up again. So that's a completely different model for learning and being curious about the world. You think in fractals, and there's so much more to discover, and I never will stop to discover things.
I think in the US, the way our educational system is constructed, there's certain curriculums for certain age groups. And it's very bottom up. It's, you're in 5th grade and you're going to learn about the Civil War in America, and then maybe you'll learn about the French Revolution. But there isn't a story. And I feel as humans, we learn and we understand and make sense of our lives and stories. I love watching documentaries, and the amount of content that's available on topics right now is wonderful. Of course, there's a little bit of youth is wasted on the young, because I remember when my father was my age, he got really into documentaries. And of course, I was a teenager and wanted to hear nothing of the cosmos and he had just stumbled on Carl Sagan, and he would bore me, or what I thought was boring. And now I'm of his age and I'm like, I can't get enough of this. But really the way you frame some of this learning, it's fascinating. And the fractal component of it is this interconnection of all of these different systems and ideas and disciplines. And it's meaning making, really, right? We're just trying to create some meaning and understanding. And there are some really interesting patterns. And I think on this show, I want to explore those patterns and talk to people like yourself and people from other disciplines of a lot of the pattern recognition across all of these disciplines. You start to see some, this might be too much to say universal truths, but certainly some things that are shockingly similar, that feel like there's some clues for us to lean in a little more and understand more deeply.
Yeah, and it's also tied to our deep need to create meaning in things.
For sure.
Because there's data, and then it's the kind of way we look at the world through the filters, through our conditioning. So there is, the level of, when we talked about the Europeans and the Americans, and you break that further down and say, well, there are pockets and different behaviors and all that. And then you break it down, and then you come to the unit of one. Each of us is unique and has a view on the world that is created by our system. It's not outside there. It's our choice of data and the interpretation. And that is amazing. This is what excited me about books, because I was able to look through the eyes of several authors and see their way of understanding the world and creating meaning. And then there is the individual and this quality. And then there is this, what connects us all and what makes us a human beings, not human doings, but how are we being? And we are relational. I think that is in our code. That is how we grew up. That is minimum. Everybody had 9 months of or 8 months of relationship. So this is so core to us, and we sometimes forget.
Oh, absolutely. I think you just nailed it. I think, and I think that has been the overarching theme of this season is our need to relate to one another. Truly relate is what we talked about before, having calm nervous systems, being able to respond from a place of clarity and calm and presence with another, and what that experience feels like when you're really doing it. And I know we've talked about this before, and I really appreciate it. We've been in instances where you're talking, but it's almost as if you're standing beside yourself. You're sort of going through the motions. And you can be in situations, often it happens professionally, where everyone's sort of doing that. And then there's sort of their other being is sort of, 2 feet behind. And it's a very different perception. I can feel it. I'm sure you can, as sensitive as you are, that you can feel when someone is standing in the space with you and really bringing themselves to you, but also with this openness of wanting to see you and understand you. And it's so powerful, and so many amazing things happen from that place. And I think, we talk about the individual and relationships, organizations, society. I think that's the key. I think that, and if you can scale that, and of course that's the challenge in the work that you do, that's where the magic happens. And that's how, this is going to sound, a little woo-woo, but that's how you heal the world, right? Is you start to get people to be able to do that again. And then we look at the loneliness epidemic and the addiction economy and all of these other big problems. I feel that they're all symptoms of this other lack, of this lack of connection.
Yeah, and it starts with connecting to yourself and realizing what's going on in yourself, especially when you're triggered. Do I try to avoid this by distractions, or can I hold that and start to integrate that because I give it space because the movement is happening? So part of it, that is the fascinating thing for me, is language is so logical and linear, and we talk about anger, but anger is a process. It starts somewhere, it builds, and then it resides again. It's much more. I feel angry is much closer to I'm anger than
Right.
I'm fixed. I'm frozen in anger, and so going to this side of much more sensing it and connecting to it, and choosing words that come closer to it and point at it. And we sense this rings true, that resonates, is something you can train and you can focus. So I like the metaphor of tuning our instrument. If I know how, that resonates and what resonates with others, I can tune in much better. I can attune myself to others. If I have that capacity of sensing that, and the curiosity is am I generating that, or am I feeling that in you? So, and discerning that and realizing that is me and that is you. I can check if there is trust. I say I have the sense you're feeling this, and I can check my perceptions, and I can hone in on getting better at that. If I feel relaxed and connected, if I feel threatened or unsafe, I will go in my head, right? And we'll discuss everything from a cognitive, observable, safe space. But I think life is a below the neck experience. It's not happening in our head.
When done well, maybe, right? And I think once you have had a taste of it, there might be people who have never even felt that they think that the cognitive, that is the world.
Oh, I've been there. I know I've been there. That was my strategy to deal with my childhood. So save in my cognition, save in all my models and that. And I think pretty much probably because of the industrialization and the area of enlightenment, I think, and therefore I am No, I don't think so. If I'm able to observe my thought and realize I'm not my thought, and I'm not sure whether you meant it that way, this is the interesting thing. That relaxes me. If I realize I'm not my thought, this is stuff that comes up based on conditioning and all that. So I don't have to act on that thought or being that thought. And that goes hand in hand with identity. Who am I? And yes, how many? Remember the book title. So one of the exercises I sometimes invite my coaches is, here is a list of 20 I ams. Just tell me who you are. And that is an amazing exercise, because do I choose nouns? Do I choose things I can't change? Do I choose an identity that is based in nationality or profession or whatever? Or do I choose verbs that I'm curious? I'm very effective. I'm lazy. And then you get into polarities, because there is not just one state that is fantastic. And very often we just aspire to be wonderful in all aspects, and we're kind of ignoring the shadow part. And there is always a shadow part to it. Where there's light, there is darkness. Without darkness, what's light?
And what we disavowed tends to come back.
Oh, yeah.
Different forms and distorted forms, right?
We see that in so many organizations. And honoring that some of the strategies of organization or states were survival strategies, then
that's the culture you're talking about, is actually the disavowed norms. Those shadows of an organization actually come out in those ways that whenever we hear people talk about that's a toxic culture, that's what you're describing now. Is
toxic culture. I'm very careful in labeling things, because there's this great story. I think it was Václavic, I'm not sure, but he was in a medical kind of symposium, and they introduced schizophrenia. And then somebody said, "So, Professor Václavic, would you diagnose? How would you do it?" And he was thinking, I said, "I wouldn't diagnose it in the first place." I love that, because it's the very moment we put labels on things, they're kind of fixed. Nor the quality of things can change and are much more fluid than the identity. So even the stories, if you would ask me, where do you come from and who, this is a story. And that kind of gives me an identity. And I can tell you that story has changed quite a bit.
Well, I was just going to ask you the story that led you from, so you're the founder and managing partner of Aergon, and you support business leaders integrating psychology and, of course, your business knowledge from a very traditional, high prestige academic and consulting background. What was the story that led you here?
The current version is, I have to give a bit of context. My father is Swiss, my mother is German, and my mother was a little kid in Berlin during the war. So there is already a context in terms of her strategies. My father comes from a family of entrepreneurs. The grandfather created this company, and he was sent to Germany to build the business. So that was my context. And what then happened was I was raised in Germany, and at the same time was told, "You're Swiss." Mother became Swiss in marrying me, and we're Swiss, and we speak Swiss German at home, which was kind of funny because my mother, being German, of course, didn't speak Swiss German. She tried, and she advanced to a level, but you hear immediately her background is German. And so if one of the key drivers in psychology is belonging, I want to belong to the family, to the group, to the tribe. That already was difficult for me because, given that context, I early on started to be a go-between and understanding the differences.
Oh, interesting.
And then I think, given that my mother and my father had coping mechanisms to deal with fear and people and being in a difficult situation, I decided to go into the world of books and readings and discovering all that. So I was reading a lot as a kid. And one of the most fascinating experiences I had when in in high school, we had chemistry, and the teacher showed an experiment having water and electricity, and suddenly two gases would be produced, and in the ratio of 2 to 1. He said, so how do we find out what those gases are? And of course, we put fire to it, and one exploded and everybody was shocked, and the other one kind of, because it was oxygen, supported the burning process. And I was fascinated. So you take a liquid and you separate that. And then learning more and more in chemistry, of course, that was just the surface. There was a better explanation, the better explanation. And that kind of curiosity I found very helpful in science, and I found very helpful with humans. Dared then to move over into this. And at the end, it also has to do with bonds and energy and how we relate to each other. So I had a model I was able to expand. If you look at the CV, it looks like, oh, and then you change totally his direction. But I would argue there were layers of learning and exposure and elements of capabilities I was able to take and bring to the other area. And then, of course, I was very naive because I thought, oh, it won't be so difficult. Let's try this. And then 2 years in the game, I said, oh my God, I really underestimated that. I was naive in getting into these areas. And then I learned.
This is familiar to me. We've had some similar backgrounds with the love of books and learning. I think traditionally going up the ladder and one saying being a consultant, being a partner, and then there's a very clear ladder and trajectory. And it can feel scary when you jump off of that and then you decide to find your own way. But the kind of work that we're talking about, it feels right, it feels necessary. And I think to your point about layers, it doesn't feel like it's in conflict. It feels like it brings something very different and differentiated to whatever you end up doing. And so I'm so impressed by your ability to integrate this deep, vast intellectual knowledge with this human side. In addition to your consulting work and your educational and leadership roles, you've written The Emperor's Cupboard and Espresso Your Mind, which I've enjoyed. And you hosted the Zen Stories podcast, which I'm voting that you do another podcast soon. You're so fascinating in being able to take all of these different areas that maybe seem disparate or seem like different tracks, that actually just creates this deep richness. And in the work that you do, because you're helping, I mean, everyone from students to CEOs, just in my mind, it just expands your vocabulary and your ability to help so many more people. And I'm wondering if you look at that as helping people, or in your work, do you assess if someone's ready to start to do the type of inner work that you're talking about, or is readiness even the right way of looking at it?
I don't know. There's this saying, I haven't said it for a long time. It says, if the pupil is ready, the teacher will appear. And I definitely, that was true for me. I think I was curious. I was fearful as well. But somehow the curiosity very often was driving it, and the passion to do it or understand it and kind of experience it. And only later I found that there are benefits I didn't even realize, cross-fertilization. I'll give you an example. In my family, music was very important because my father actually wanted to become a pianist, and he played a lot. And so and we were singing, and all that was fine. And I think I was about 40 or 41, and a good friend of mine, we met, and very un-Swiss, he was late. And I said, so wait, what happened? And he said, oh, I just had a singing class. And I said, wow, how did you come up with this? Long story short, and I said, I want that as well. So I took singing class, and that was so amazing once. And then my sisters were singing in the chorus and said, you need to come. And so 2 of my 3 sisters and I were for 8 years in the chorus.
Wow.
And I was so smitten and impressed by the leadership of Marco Kunz, who was leading the chorus. The way he listened and the way he was able to name emotions, and we were 8 voices, and you said, I heard you, and da da da. And so that there is a quality he brought to the setting, and a leadership quality. He was very friendly but very strict, and going for excellence. And so that combination, and then I learned later in a different context that I was able to hear much more of the emotions when people talked, and I got a sense for it. So there was a higher resolution in just listening to the voice and how people would talk. And suddenly I said, wow, this is cool. Yeah, it's a benefit out of this. I didn't expect it.
Wow, I would never have thought. That's
so
incredible.
these are the kind of things you start discovering when you're curious. And I have a number of these. And I go, wow, this is really amazing. How exciting.
You said it before around curiosity. And a friend of mine, Christian Madsberg, wrote a book, Look, How to Pay Attention. And the book talks about all of these discoveries and innovations that occurred in really surprising ways like you're describing, because someone was paying attention and curious and then applied that in a different area of their lives.
Yeah, and if we go back to the question, if people are ready, I think there is, on various level on the nervous system, is, am I the right person? On the how I'm listening and connecting, and I think I'm getting better at it, if that is relevant at all. And there are some people where it doesn't feel right. And of course, I can put a story on it why it didn't work out, but then I'm already slightly detached from, no, she or he made the choice, and I honor that. Everything else we could get very conceptual, and I could come up with a number of reasons why it works or doesn't work. But I think it's just a sense people have, and when I have, usually I have something like 20 minutes or 40 minutes chemistry talk, and then say, sleep it over, trust your instincts, and whatever you choose is totally okay with me, because I think at the end I can produce a lot of noise and people choose what they want to engage with, but at the end it's their agency, it's their authorship of their life. I want to support, not help. Help for me implies, you're needy. No, I think you're doing fine. It's a question of, is that relationship beneficial in ways? And I have to tell you, this is one of the really amazing things in being a coach. I learned so much. I get viewpoints. I go, wow, really wow. I have a client who's a chess master, and he talks about stuff, and I go, wow, never thought this. Now he thinks about the world, and very often we come to this point where is this flow? Where's this being in the river of life and enjoying it? And if coaching becomes that, if we're wow, 1.5 hours are over, that is amazing.
Sometimes I'll be struggling with something, and then a script will pop up in my mind as though I wrote it weeks ago for myself to find later on, or a coachee will say something and I will respond in a certain way, and then I'll respond to myself in the exact same way when something similar arises. As we wrap up, I wanted to reflect on how heavy the world can feel right now. But also at the same time, I'm noticing more people drawn to coaching and change work, and even having deeper conversations like this one. Noticing on LinkedIn that posts that once felt very transactional and self-promotion now seem to show more vulnerability and authenticity. And I'm wondering if you're hopeful that these might be early signs of collective healing or growth, or just a positive shift.
My sense is that it is important to see things as they are. If I'm too hopeful, I kind of paint a rosy picture. I think I'm a realistic optimist.
Okay.
So, and then the other side is, do I feel agency? Can I contribute? Can I make a difference? And I find I can do that in any kind of interaction. And there was, when I and so there are helpful and very encouraging trends, I find. So I did my first coaching education in 96. And at that time, when you did coaching, it was more like, oh, you need therapy. What's wrong with you kind of attitude. And then, the sports people, everybody now, it's almost status. You have a fantastic coach and I have Tony Robbins, or I have this coach and he helps me. But the point is more, how am I feeling in this world? Do I feel I can make a difference? And can I focus on things? And I have this maybe almost naive thing that any interaction I can influence. And every interaction is important. And I like to see it as it is, not the rosy pictures, oh, we're improving, or the negative picture, or look at all the number of wars. And then we can come up with data that proves one point or another, because we have less, but we have much more escalating conflicts. We have much more brutality in the way we treat each other. So I think I had really, being a consultant, I was more ambitious in my purpose and all that. And now I focus much more on those moments. And there is a beautiful question. I heard that from I think he was an Egyptian philosopher, and he was interviewed by a BBC guy. And the guy said, so tell me, who's the most important person for you? And another philosopher pondered that question. And then he gave an answer which I really needed to ponder, because he said, always the person in front of me.
That's beautiful.
And that has a quality of really being in the moment, being connected, because everything else is in my head or somewhere else. And it has this quality of connecting to my vis-a-vis. It's not just me. I'm the most important. I need to be safe. I think we have, especially in the Western world, we have a hyper individualization going on. Self-help programs, optimization programs, longevity. We will live 120 years. I'm not sure that is the way I look at it. I think there is some humbleness that is needed in this way of looking at it.
That is so touching, and I'm taking a pause because so many things are coming together for me as you say that. The first season of this podcast had the tagline, "You are the change you've been waiting for," and it was very much, you are the change. And something shifted, I don't know what, but it didn't feel right anymore. And this season is really about the relational space, as you said it. And that as overwhelming as the world is, I'm not going to talk politics on this show. I'm not going to talk about economic plans and policy. And to your point, those are stories and those are things generally outside of most of our control. But how I respond to you, or how I respond to the person who cut me off on the highway, is in my control. It is not just about me, but it does require something of me. And it has the potential of making an impact, like a ripple that we don't know where it goes. And certainly if we are intentional with every interaction that way, then something shifts for us and something shifts in our energy field. And then if you do that, and the person next to us does that, and the person next to us does that, that feels more like the way.
Yes, and I think it's also there science comes in, and they tested that, and there are many examples where people, they pay forward or do something good for others, and that will impact their behavior. They will be very likely to be more positive in their next interaction. That's the proof I need. That's the kind of change I'd like to see. And then we will fall back. I fall back to, I think family is a very special setup. And my big two teachers are my wife and my daughter. So yeah, this is part of the messiness and the joy of being alive.
Well, I mean, I deeply believe in the power of conversations like this. I feel like it helps us to both heal ourselves, but also to challenge ourselves and to grow. And that this is the work that can help us then show up more with the person in front of us and to support people so that we can operate more times than less. Never going to be perfect, but more so from a place of clarity and care and integrity. And across all of this, from polycrisis to road rage, it feels like it does come back to, do we react automatically or do we build the capacity to respond with conscious compassion? And Thomas, you demonstrate that through your work and how generously you share your wisdom and compassion with others, including me. I want to thank you. I'm extremely grateful and honored to spend this time with you today. So thank you so much. It's been a gift.
Thank you.